I'm not completely sure what was the final name.
Earth Cooling Research.
Yeah, great. So um, so the speakers are Timothy Daly and Marines Carvajal, Edson Becerra, and myself. And Tim Daly is is for what I have researched. You are have obtained your PhD at the Sorbonne University, and since 2021, you are part of the academic coordination of the Fogarty International Center and mentoring project in the bioethics programs at Flaxo, Argentina. Also think that you have a new position uh, in Italy. I'm not completely sure. And Maria Carvajal is she holds a PhD at anthropology, and she's a permanent researcher at the National Argentinian Research Agency, and also at the University of Buenos Aires. She's a lecturer or professor at the University of Buenos Aires. And Edson Becerra is a postdoctoral researcher, also at the National Argentinian Research Agency. Um, and okay, we are part of this bioethical project, and still I'm not the better person to explain what is that we are doing. I think the right guy to do it is Tim, so I leave you with him. So Tim,
Okay, great. I will just give you 1 second. Let me just try and share my screen. So, share. There we go. Okay, so can you guys see my screen? Is that okay? So the title of my talk, I'm going to be giving a little bit of a talk, but first I will just give a bit of an overview to the project. This is some of the work I've been doing with the PI of this project, Ignacio Mastroleo, who works at CONICET as a researcher and also at Flaxo Argentina, which is where we work with. We deal with we have a master's program in bioethics, and we have lots of trainees from across Latin America who we train in bioethics. So thank you very much for the invitation to talk today and to present the project. So as a bit of an overview then, the project is called, we've called it the LAC UK project, Latin America and the Caribbean UK project, because we're researchers primarily based in Latin America. I'm a British national that work in Latin America, so we have an international spirit. We have researchers working across different countries in Latin America and in Europe. So the idea is the overall approach of the project is theory and practice, looking at the ethics and governance of Earth cooling research as part of this big funding program, which is the largest funded program in the history of geoengineering research, looking at climate interventions, but there's an important distinction that we'll be making between research and deployment, right? So we're really talking about small scale research efforts to understand the impact of potential interventions in the climate as a distinct way of dealing with the problem of climate change. So this is funded by the UK ARIA, which is a sort of a governmental agency, but it's sort of a publicly funded research agency looking at high risk, high reward research. And so there are 21 projects involved in the ARIA call for Earth cooling research, and 5 projects are looking at ethics and governance. So we have a 2-year project hosted by the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research, and we want to build a research network asking questions about how to do ethics and governance applied to this research. So I'll just give you a little brief overview of the institutional sort of context in which this has taken place and the work packages, and then I'll give you a bit of a sneak preview, let's say, of some of the work that we've been doing in the first work package. So this is the third project that we've been doing with sort of Argentinian colleagues in the last couple of years on, let's say, solar geoengineering research in the global south. So the Degrees Initiative is an initiative that basically funds empirical and socio-political projects across the world in the global south, and deals with the question of justice. Our particular project is looking at health justice, climate innovation, so looking at these kind of innovative interventions in the climate and what they mean for the global south. And so you'll see that one of the papers that came out of that is Carabajal and colleagues that some of us contributed to. So we're looking at an interesting case that I'll describe briefly, and so will Maria Ines. We're currently working on writing a report for the World Health Organization. So this is the first funded project by the World Health Organization looking at solar geoengineering and its impact on health. So this is kind of a historic moment. We're involved in writing a report for this. So these first two projects are the principal investigator is Florencia Luna, who is the director of the program at Flaxo Argentina, and she is also involved in the third project, but it's Ignacio Mastoreo, who's the PI of this ARIA funded project. And these should be sort of understood together. So there are sort of overlapping work packages that are fundamentally looking at how we can deal with the question of justice and solar geoengineering research and its potential deployment one day. So that's a bit of the background to the other project. So what is the ARIA project? So we've talked about this idea of like concepts and implementation. So again, I'll be just talking. This is just me talking this is me talking, not my institutions or anything. So fundamentally, we have 5 work packages in the ARIA project. So basically, we have concepts and implementation. So we want to know how we can move from theory to practice, right? So I'm the lead of the first work package, which is all about clarifying concepts. This is a known activity in sort of analytical philosophy and philosophy of science, where one of the things that philosophers try and do is sort of clear up the concepts to reduce confusion. So we're looking at this idea of like translational climate science, this idea of building an evidence base and potentially intervening in the climate. So we're doing that really from quite a theoretical point of view, but trying to make that a useful theory. So then that's our sort of theoretical philosophy of science, ethics, sort of really fundamental conceptual ethics approach. Then we're fortunate to have a group of logicians working with us. So Federico is leading the second work package that he'll be talking about and looking at this concept of disagreement. And then we have this sort of so this is still quite conceptual. Then we have sort of the implementation packages, which Maria Florencia Santi is working on. So this idea of like looking at the ethical status and the principles that are used to define how we should do geoengineering in the correct way and geoengineering research. And then Maria Ines Carabajal, who's here today, is looking at, let's say, in a very broad sense, regional governance, participation in research, public engagement, public perceptions. And then finally, this idea of capacity building, we have this 5th work package, which is sort of like, we could call it a bonus work package, but really it's the heart of the project, which is getting a group of researchers together to think about these very socially relevant questions and making sure that we train the new generation of researchers to help build the regional response to these pressing international and local questions. So that's an overview of the sort of project. It's a 2-year project we're looking at. So there'll be lots of outputs, hopefully, papers, trying to impact processes, and we'll be organising at least some one in-person event. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about some of the sort of clarifying concepts, why I think that's important. This is work I've been doing with Ignacio, the PI of the project. So if we go back to, so this is a short 10-minute presentation. I'll be finished in not too much time. So if we go back to Confucius, he argued that he was asked, what would you do as the first, if you were governor, how would you govern? And he said, well, a superior man, in regard to what he does not know, shows a cautious reserve. If names be not correct, language is not in accordance with the truth of things. If language be not in accordance with the truth of things, affairs cannot be carried on to success. So we have to make sure that we use language correctly. Why? Just to reduce confusion, because it's, such a controversial topic as geoengineering. Well, again, you have to define, what do you mean by geoengineering? Do you mean small-scale interventions, large-scale interventions? Do you mean research? Do you mean deployment? There's lots of scope for confusion. So, and what's particular here is that we think the best way of teasing out the different meanings of geoengineering is understanding when we talk about like a technology, geoengineering as technology, well, when it comes to governance, fundamentally, you can't govern a piece of hardware in itself. The thing you use to have an impact on the climate. What you can do is govern the uses of those technologies to different ends. So we have this overarching, within the theoretical side of this project, a sort of aims-based approach. We want to look at the different kinds of aims and try and carve out the different aims that people are using these technologies for. research and deployment is fundamentally the major sort of distinction here. And so there's pretty good evidence that the geoengineering research and deployment world suffers from this problem of what we call the unrectified use of language. So Confucius is associated with this need to rectify the terms, to rectify the names, to clear up the concepts we're using to describe a field of inquiry. So this is, if we put this into a slightly more sort of, argumentative structure, logically speaking, well, the first premise is that if what we say is not what we meant, our ethical principles based on that terminology are wrong. If our principles are wrong, our governance is wrong. If our governance is wrong, there is injustice and helpless confusion. So we must revise our language, rectify terms or definitions to avoid injustice and confusion. So there's also, I'll show you, there's a bit of a historical example from bioethics, looking at research on human subjects. It might seem kind of obvious now, but this idea that there is a difference between research and medical practice, it was not a obvious distinction before it was made. So making distinctions can be useful. And we think making sort of this concept, this idea between distinguishing between research and non-research is a really important dimension. So why is it important? If we don't get the terms right, if we get our language wrong, what might happen? Well, people might misjudge what they're agreeing to. So they might think that they are opposed to all forms of geoengineering when actually they might just be opposed to large-scale deployment of geoengineering, or the idea that we should only do geoengineering instead of mitigation and adaptation as responses to climate change. And if they have this sort of a misjudgment about what it really means, then they might be completely against research, even though actually research doesn't imply deployment, right? So they might support policies that don't allow for knowledge to be produced about geoengineering. So what we're talking about in this idea of like the translational process of climate science is that we can't use we can't know if it's going to be something that we should investigate if we don't investigate it in any way. It might lead people to overstate risks and benefits, and assume that the risks of research are the risks of deployment, which is not the case. They might fail to distinguish different related activities, and we're going to give you responsible members of society. So we're going to give you an example of that. And then finally, it might also weaken trust in the process. So if people think solar geoengineering research implies we're going to deploy it, then public opposition may grow even to incremental research like the kind of stuff being undertaken at ARIA. So in medicine, there was this, we're using this kind of like a comparison from medicine. So we're learning from the history of medicine and medical research that has this rich research ethics tradition that has tried to establish protections for humans, basically. So we're trying to apply that logic to the climate. And so if you go back to the Belmont report, this is a document from the 1970s to protect humans research participants. The idea is that if there's a useful distinction to draw between research and practice. So when you do research, you're trying to gain knowledge. When you do practice, you're trying to help someone or some population in some way. And within that practice distinction, you have this idea of validated practice, which has gone through like a kind of research process. And then you have non-validated practice, which hasn't necessarily gone through full validation, even though it might be being used. And that often is the case in emergencies such as COVID, but it can also be things like off-label use, or there are different contextual reasons as to why someone might use non-validated practice. But the major analytical distinction here is between research and practice, and that's a really helpful distinction for talking about geoengineering, and I'm going to give you the example of that. So UNEP apparently agrees with this general approach, this idea. They talk about this idea that there are different types of SRM activities. So UNEP is the UN Environmental Programme. They released a document called One Atmosphere, an independent expert review on solar radiation modification, a form of geoengineering, where you're trying to change you're trying to make sunlight reflect more off the Earth in some way. And so they give some examples of this, and it's not perfectly rectified language, as you can see in red. So they talk about different kinds of research. They talk about they don't allow for the possibility of a small scale deployment. The purpose of this is just to talk about the fact that even in the UNEPs, which is sort of one of the leading, let's say, professional bodies involved in this space, there is instances of unrectified terms where it's not kind of clear what's There's no aim for indoor research, whereas there are aims for outdoor research, and deployment, whereas indoor research doesn't have an aim. And it's kind of problematic use of language, even though it's a good first step. So we offer in the paper of which Maria Inés is the first author, we try to give an experiment, a definition of experiment, but it's far too theoretical to get into. I think it's just that we're really focusing on this idea of an aims-based approach to defining what an experiment may be. So we're going to use, I'm going to give you just an example to make my point, and then I'll stop talking. So these are both you could call these both SRM experiments. So they're both this idea of, so the basis behind SRM, solar radiation modification, is this idea of reflecting sunlight to cool the planet, right? And so a group at Harvard University was involved in this very famous research experiment called SCOPEX, right? So SCOPEX means that it's short for the Small-Scale Outdoor Perturbation Trial of Aerosols in the Stratosphere. That's one recent experiment. And then there's another recent experiment called Make Sunsets, where they're not doing research, okay? They're using these experimental cooling credits. So they use the term experiment and experimental. And so they're literally releasing small outdoor balloons of sulfur dioxide, which is an aerosol that can reflect sunlight. So if you go on the geoengineering monitor, SCOPEX, apparently, according to the geoengineering monitor, aims to develop a form of SRM known as stratospheric aerosol injection. That's a deployment aim. It aims to develop a form of SRM. That is actually not true. SCOPEX did not aim to do that. SCOPEX aimed to improve understanding of the risks of solar geoengineering. There's a big difference between a research aim, understanding risks and efficacy, versus a deployment aim to develop a technology. They're not trying to develop a technology. They're checking whether these uses are associated with risk and benefits. Big difference between research and deployment. And here, Geoengineering Monitor, which is notoriously, has a notoriously skeptical position on some aspects of research and deployment, is confusing the terms. This is an example of unrectified terms in action. They are mischaracterizing the aims of SCOPEX, which I think was a quite common misconception. So whereas this Make Sunsets, this is another experiment, they deliberately have a deployment aim. We cool Earth with reflective clouds. It's a small scale deployment. And we, in the paper that Maria Inés led, we critique this case because they did basically, they did not do things in a way that are ethically justifiable. We do not, our position is quite critical of this small scale deployment that they were doing without sort of engaging communities and the international community. So the whole purpose of why do we do this translational process in research, and why do we do research before deployment, is because we want to separate the wheat from the chaff. We want to know what works and what doesn't work. It doesn't mean you're going to deploy, okay? You withdraw it if it doesn't work, or you take it off the market if it's not used. If it's being used and it shouldn't be used, you don't use. The purpose of research is to decide what works and what doesn't work according to the risk benefits. The purpose is not to deploy, and it's important to get that right. So we're sort of building on that theoretical model to try and get that the case. So we argue that, when we talk about solar radiation modification, there are examples of unrectified terms, and that can lead to misunderstanding, misrepresenting the aims of the kind of research that's being undertaken. That leads to confusion. Confusion leads to injustice. And so we should try and work on those concepts to avoid injustice. Thank you for your attention and for the possibility to present our work to you.
Thank you very much, Tim. So our next speaker is Maria Inés Carvajal. I have already introduced you. So please, Maria Inés. I think that you can share your screen.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Not yet, not me at least. Yeah.
Now I can.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. My presentation is entitled Fostering Ethical Governance on Solar Radiation Modification, Implications for Public Engagement. Well, this is my presentation outline. I would like to talk about the work package that I'm leading, the main research topics and questions that guide our research, why does it matter, What have we done so far? I will talk about governance. What is governance? What are the main critical questions and gaps? And finally, I will try to talk about our last publication entitled No Governance is Governance, Mapping Solar Geoengineering Discussions in Latin America and the Caribbean, and final conclusions. So our work package focuses on three main research questions. So first, our main purpose is to analyze the research on public engagement and public perception of SRM in the Latin American region, and particularly in Argentina. And we have also a cross-national approach with Brazil. So we are working on in a comparative approach on both countries, in Argentina, Brazil, but we have a broad lens on what is happening in the Latin American and the Caribbean region. So we have three main research topics. As Tim said, we are thinking about what is responsible climate innovation. We're working on rectifying the language. What is an experiment? What are the main guidelines for an inclusive, transparent governance mechanism to guide global decisions on SRM? And in this context, public perception and public engagement on SRM are key aspects of an inclusive and transparent governance structure. So we started with a literature review and media coverage about what are the main assumptions and uncertainties over SRM in the LAC region. And we are carrying out empirical research in Argentina, as I said before, doing interviews with environment and climate experts to analyze what are the main assumptions behind the idea of SRM, what do they know about it, and what are the main opinions and perspectives about climate change, about the future, and the role of technologies in this context. And why does it matter? Well, first, we know that there is a low level of familiarity in the LAC region, but also worldwide. Public perception of SRM is leading, or public perception studies of SRM is leading by global North countries. So we need to improve the representation of Latin American perspectives in global studies of SRM. I'm going to talk about the Make Sunset case that is very important in our region because this is a US startup that carried out a non-research experiment in Baja California, Mexico, without governance permission, without community engagement. So this this experiment that this institution, this startup carried out, led the announcement of an intention to ban experimentation in Mexico. So this is a very strong response from this government. And this case highlights the need to develop ethical, democratic, and participatory governance frameworks, not only in the LAC region, but also worldwide. So we know that strengthened regional scientific capacities and institutional knowledge is key to ensure a meaningful participation for governance. And what have we done so far? Well, as I said, and Tim highlighted also, we published the first Latin American article called No Governance is Governance, mapping solar geoengineering discussions in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I would like to talk a little bit about why this this research is so important for the region. So we begin with the central paradox, because the absence of regulation, solar radiation modification in our region is itself a form of governance. But how can states or regional institutions take meaningful actions when they lack both scientific information and local expertise? So we believe that it's important not only that governments can take a position regarding SRM, but also how the LAC region can take a leading role in these processes, because not having evidence-based information can lead to vulnerability. In this case, so we highlight three main ideas. The first one is the lack of regulations in our region can lead to mistrust, fuel perceptions of neocolonialism, and restricts potentially valuable and responsible research. The second main idea is this theatrical Make Sunset case is not ethically justified in light of the diversity of risk associated with it. And the third one is that this research that we've started offer a foundational and participatory recommendations to promote effective, transparent, and sustainable governance of SRM, including our region in global conversations. But what is governance? I would like to start with this broad concept of governance delivered by the IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So governance is a comprehensive and inclusive concept of the full range of means for deciding, managing, and implementing and monitoring policies and measures. So governance is not just about a global entity or a global home to discuss these issues. We can have a governance at many levels. So we need to talk about a polycentric idea of governance. This means including regional institutions, including various levels of government, global, regional, subnational, local, and also take into consideration the role of the private sector, of non-governmental actors, and most importantly, civil society. As this is a global and a controversial technology, all the voices must have a place in the discussion, or must be part of the conversations. And what are the critical governance? Sorry. What are the critical governance questions? The first one is the decision authority. Who would make deployment decisions and through what processes? So currently there is no home where this topic is being discussed properly. So we need to think about what institutions should be developed to create a governance structure that can be broad enough to take into consideration all the voices that should be affected by SRM, by the potentially deployment of SRM. Then we need to talk about monitoring and control. How would the international community monitor the implementation and also ensuring compliance? What technical systems, verification protocols, and enforcement mechanisms would effectively oversee SRM activities across borders? As I said before, through what mechanisms can youth, vulnerable communities, and indigenous populations meaningful shape decisions? So we need to think about public perception, or public engagement, not just through an instrumental lens, but also as a more critical perspective to build legitimacy on a technology that will affect all of us in a way. And we need to talk about risk compensations. The literature says that there will be winners and losers. So how we can build mechanisms to compensate countries or regions that would be most affected by this technology. But the question is about how we're going to compensate the countries that will be affected also by climate change. So here there is a risk perspective that should be taken into consideration, thinking about the impacts of climate change versus the impacts of the potential effects of SRM in a planetary scale perspective. And there are many governance gaps. As I said before, there is no home to properly discuss this topic. And also, there are no formal governance regimes, there is no systematic coordinations, there are significant gaps. So these governance gaps create substantial risk because there is risk of unilateral deployment, there is risk of power imbalances, international tensions that could be raised by this technology. So it's important that it's really relevant because we need to talk about, we need to open up the discussions to all the countries that could be affected by the technology. So going ahead with the case that we study. So we take the Make Sunset case, as I said before, because they released aerosols in Baja California, Mexico, without permission or public consultation. Mexico responded by announcing a ban on SRM experimentations. So what have we done? So in this case, we make a diagnosis, identifying governance gaps in Latin America and the Caribbean, but also worldwide. We use this case study, or we explore this case study as a way to see how this kind of unethical and transparent way of conducting experiments could lead to or could affect the scientific community itself, because as this is a non-research experimentation, it could affect scientists that are doing research in a very transparent, inclusive way. So it's important to know that we're overseeing these cases as a way to build concrete recommendations for inclusive and anticipatory SRM governance in our region and also elsewhere. Well, solar geoengineering risk. As you all know, solar geoengineering, and particularly stratospheric aerosol injection, is a worldwide technology, and it aims to reflect sunlight to cool the planet. So we know there are many risks: unequal regional impact, scientific uncertainty, ethical and governance challenges. So understanding local and regional effects is essential for assessing the legitimacy of any SRM activity. We know that there are governance gaps. Globally, there is no formal governance structures for SRM. So key issues include a lack of a global legal framework, minimal participation from Global South countries, sporadic and uncoordinated capacity building efforts. So there are many activities and initiatives going on, but they are fragmented and they are insufficient. And what is the lack situation? When within Latin America and the Caribbean, SRM is not currently a priority in most climate strategies. There is low public awareness, minimal research infrastructure, and little institutional engagement. So what is needed? First, a stronger local expertise, access to trustworthy information about SRM, participatory governance structures to manage emerging technologies and unpredictable developments. So far, many activities have been done, as I said before, many capacity buildings, activities such as workshops, and many engagement activities, but as I said before, these were really fragmented, and there is no way that in which we can develop capacities in the region if these activities are not sustained over time. And why this matters for our region? So the Make Sunset case triggered scientific and media scrutiny, further highlighting the governance vacuum. To understand how the case was framed, we analyzed news coverage from 2022 to 2024 in both English and Spanish. We use a Hawley-Back's framework for assessing representation of geoengineering in the media. Here you can see all the types of risk that we found in the literature review and also in the media coverage. These types of risk are related to climate change impact, this risk analysis, the risk posed by climate change versus the risk of potential uses of SRM, the moral hazard, unintended planetary effects, geopolitical risk, termination shock, health risk, and lack of governance. And this table summarized the different types of risks that we were able to identify. And we analyzed the Make Sunset reception in the media and the perceptions of risk. There are many dominant narratives going on. The first one is that Make Sunset act irresponsibly without consent or scientific legitimacy. The project commercialization undermines trust in SRM research. The media coverage emphasized the lack of governance and transparency, and some voiced concern about unilateral actions and climate colonialism. And here there is the strong point of our article, that is the ethical analysis that Tim and Ignacio Mastroleo, they are working on, particularly they are working on this. So we know Make Sunset has been widely described as an experiment, often with negative connotations, but to clarify the ethical stakes, we adopt a neutral definition. An SRM experiment is any deliberate intervention lacking sufficient evidence for safe or effective use. And what are the implications for governance and public engagement? Well, this brings us to one of our core arguments. Ethical governance requires both robust public engagement, but also transparency and democratic governance. And why it is important to engage the public? Because it's important to build trust and credibility, because it ensures decisions are grounded in local values and perspectives that are context sensitive. So governance must be inclusive, context-aware, and attuned to epistemic justice. And these are some conclusions of our article. The first one is that the Make Sunset underscores the lack of regulation, that the lack of regulation is not neutrality. It's a governance choice that leaves the door open for unethical actions. The LAC region must not remain on the sidelines because it increases vulnerability. Strengthen regional capacities is really key. We need to have scientific access or evidence-based information to make better decisions. We need to build institutional expertise. We need to have clear rules to distinguish between research and non-research interventions, and to clarify the responsibilities of private actor, governance, and scientists. And finally, we emphasize that culturally responsive public engagement is not optional. It is essential for legitimate and ethical climate governance. So these are some results that we have from our work package that in a way is interrelated with the other work packages, but we also find some things that are missing. So first, there is low regional awareness, and it brings potential risk to the region, so we need to be part of the conversations. There is a huge governance gap. So the Make Sunset case revealed the absence of ethical, democratic, and participatory governance frameworks for SRM activities. There is a need for clear definitions, as Tim said. We need to find ethical and regulatory distinctions, the importance of differentiating between scientific research designed to produce general knowledge versus non-research and experimental activities. And finally, we have to think about the role of these rogue actors in the SRM landscape, because unauthorized experiment can distort public understanding, undermine legitimate SRM research, reinforcing the need for governance mechanisms. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marinés. So, let me try to share. Okay, do you see them, the slides? Yeah. So, so this is a joint work with Edson Becerra, which is also part of our small group of logicians and theoretical philosophers working on this mainly bioethical project. So let me explain what is the goal of our work here. So we are in charge of work package 2, which is entitled Assessing Disagreements about Geoengineering Research and Formalizing Theories about Intervention Sample Applied to Geoengineering Research. We are Eduardo Barrio and me who are responsible for these work packages, and also Edson Becerra, Ailén Babuza Castro, Camila Fiore, and Jonathan Ehrenfried, which is also a researcher working on this project. And we have 3 main goals. The first one is to map the arguments about for and against stratospheric aerosol injection, formalize theories and notions around intervention ensemble, and some key applications to social geoengineering. And our third goal is to apply the philosophical literature on disagreement, and in particular how to resolve pair disagreement, on how lay people can assess which options to adopt based on a public disagreement between experts, in particular to apply this to the debate around social geoengineering. So, as you see, we look for different forms of clarifying the debate around this matter. So let's start by mapping arguments. So our first goal is to map the arguments for and against stratospheric aerosol injection. And our first focus is to evaluate the arguments against, not to evaluate, just to look for the arguments against and categorize them. So we start with the arguments against, and our next goal will be to do a similar thing for the arguments for SAI. So the corpus is these 5 papers. The first one is the one that has Marinés Carvajal as the main author, but also Tim Daly is part of is one of the co-authors, and the head of the group, Ignacio Mastroleo, but also Florencia Luna and Marinés Santi. And I think I'm not forgetting anyone, but maybe I am. So we have distinguished these 5 type of arguments. This is a work that has been done mainly by Ailén Babuza Castro, and with the main help of Camila Fiore. We have all contribute, but Ailén was the main responsible of this, if I get things right. So the 5 categories that we have distinguished are anticipating wrongdoing, sustained risks, unintended side effects, insufficient intended effects, and lack of information. So the first one, the first sub-item is anticipated wrongdoing. And the main idea of all this argument is that the research or deployment of SAI makes future moral or social wrongs more likely. And we have distinguished 6 of them. So the first one is moral hazard, meaning that it was favoring SAI will delay transformative policies toward decarbonization and climate justice. So if we favor this, we won't favor some other technologies which are better suited for the work. And moreover, we increment injustice. The second one is distribution threat. It's continuation threat, sorry, means as sudden warming may come up if the deployment stops. It's not a may, actually, it's more certain like that. Our first argument is the slippery slope or locking, which says basically that research now will make significantly more likely that premature and dangerous deployment will occur. So in order to delay at least these dangerous deployments, we need to ban research, or at least restrict them restricted in a very severe way. Then we have this argument that we have labeled as human and God dystopia, which basically says that if we research on this new technology, it will make more likely that humans develop certain biases, such as view of themselves as separate and above the natural world. Then there's the argument that we label inequality, which says that it worsens the relationships between North and South, and private and public, sorry. I'm favoring the first of these terms, the North and the private, over the South and the public. We're also lacking engagement from local communities. And our final form of anticipated wrongdoing is Bellic effects, meaning that if we favor the deployment of this research, then this increases the risk of hostile or conflictual uses. And we can separate these arguments into subcategories depending on the type of risk that they display. So, for instance, we can discriminate between psychological risks from geographical risks, sorry, and political risk. And something similar can be done with other categories, but I will not do it here. Sorry, Edson is the co-author of this. Edson, if you want to interrupt me, please feel free to do it. The second family of arguments against SAI is the one that we label sustained risk. And the main idea behind all of them is that the deployment implies persistent systematic risk, independence of wrongdoing. And we can distinguish between 6 of them again. Yeah. The first one is the one that we label termination shock, meaning that if for whatever reasons deployment stops, this will lead to a rapid and drastic increase of global warming. The second one is irreversibility. Aerosols cannot be easily removed. Then we have human error. This is so this complex technology is deploying a complex system. So this increases the risk of failure. And we have economic costs. Which says basically that there are no accurate approximation how much money do we actually need to put into research. Then there's these governance gaps that Marinés has highlighted, and health risk. Our first group of arguments against SAI is the unintended side effects of SAI. And the main idea behind all of them is that it alters planetary system in unpredictable ways. So the first one is the regional climate disruption, meaning that they might alter monsoons, which might alters in any way, increase, decrease them, make them appear in some other time, which might cause agricultural losses, food crisis, and water insecurity. Then there's the ozone depletion, and the reduced sunlight for plants and social power. There's the risk of more acid deposition, and there are also the widening of the sky that might cause like moral and psychological shortcomings, and there's also the environmental impact. Then there's the argument that says that the benefits are not enough. The main idea behind these arguments is that SAI fails to achieve key environmental benefits. It does not reduce ocean acidification and lacks these co-benefits that alternative technologies like carbon dioxide removal has. And then we have this final family of arguments against, which we label lack of information. The main idea behind them is that there's insufficient data, insufficient validation, and insufficient ethical clarity behind this technology. So there's unknown and inconclusive results around SAI, and there are also legal and ethical uncertainties concerning accountability, consent, and global legitimacy. So again, we can, for future work, we can group them, each of these family of arguments, into different subcategories. As you may have noticed, there's some overlap between these arguments belonging to the different families or subfamilies. So we need to clarify exactly to what family to frame each argument. We need to also expand this work, do a similar thing for the arguments for SAI, and of course we need to increase and update the corpus of the materials that we have used. So this is a corpus that we have used for now. So our second goal is, let me check the time. Okay, I have a few minutes. Our second goal is modeling. We need to, second goal is to model some theories that other members of the group have been working on and apply them to this social geoengineering case. In particular, we aim at formalizing some key notions and theories developed by other members of the group, meaning Ignacio Mastroleo, Tim Daly, and Guillermo Marín Penela, which are based on this work by Kimmelman and London. The work is a two-stage process. First, we aim at formalizing some key theses and and afterwards, and ideally, we are looking to axiomatize the theory itself. The benefits of doing this is that clarity increases when we formalize theories, and moreover, we make explicit the commitments, sometimes I know, even for the authors, that our theories carries. I will be showing a little bit of our current work, which is mostly in first order logic. We have also, in particular, Edson has been working on a second order version of this project, which has some technical advantages, but also increases the complexity. So it's harder to understand by people that, I don't know, not expert in logic, mainly. Jonathan Kimmelman had introduced this notion of intervention ensemble to describe the full configuration required for a treatment to work. And the approach shift attention from drugs as subject to ensembles as systems. And well, the work that this is sort of summing up what they have worked, the main thesis of these papers and the work by Ignacio, Tim, and Guillermo, still unpublished, still in process. So we have basically formalized the notion of intervention example as a function. So it's sort of a name that applies to objects and gives you another as an object another a fact. It depends of it's relative to a material dimension, a technical dimension, social dimension, and this might be important theoretical and practical background, and also depends of it applies to subjects and at a time and produce a result. So our metaphysics should be expanded to include facts. So it will be the metaphysics of this reconstruction is heavily loaded, but still we think that further work might deflate the way to interpret these things as this talk about facts, for instance. So this just the first thing says just that we're working in first order logic, and the second thing is explanatory trial, which comes is also treated as a function that names an object, and it comes with a confirmation degree, which should be lower than a given threshold. If not, if it's higher, it's not a trial anymore, it's confirmed. And we need this actuality operator that sort of says that that makes these names sentences that expresses that a given intervention example actually occurs. And this complex sentence just says that if the confirmation degree of a given experimental trial exceeds a given threshold, then we the theoretical and practical standard that is obtained from the trial has a higher confirmation degree. And we can apply this technique to this short article by Paul, which is about contrail management. And he says basically that given the potential of contrail management to cool the planet, we should not to further expand this technique and apply to a higher scale is ethically unjustified. And we can divide this research, the experimentation in two types, research experimentation and non-research experimentation. And we can, these two theses, this sentence just says that if the climate warming risk is exceed a given threshold, then the experimentation is justified, and the sentence below says that if the risk is not enough, it's not permissible. So our third goal, the third goal of this work package is to clarify and apply the notions, this literature on disagreement to social geoengineering. So we have not been doing much work on this for now, but basically there are three basic, so we can discriminate between disagreements about propositions from disagreements about what to do. There are these three key attitudes, doxastic attitudes: belief, disbelief, which is belief of the negation mainly, and suspension of judgment. And action disagreements can be translated into belief disagreements, meaning through sentences that says I should do, or this thing should be done, for example, or this thing is permitted or not. And there's this whole literature on disagreement, and in particular on pair disagreement. So there can be disagreement with superiors, with inferiors, and with peers, and with unknown people. But in particular, if there's no clear, there's not a consensus in the philosophical community on what to do when facing peer disagreement. So let's take two individuals, X and Y, which are peers and experts in the interesting case that disagree about a given topic. What should we do? What opinion should we have? So these are some factors that establish when two subjects are epistemic peers. They don't need to have the same cognitive ability or the same evidence, but all things considered, they should be balanced in two peers, epistemic peers. So if these two guys are equal on all disagreement factors, then they're equally likely to judge P correctly. However, the reverse just not necessarily hold. And so this whole debate of what to do with when facing epistemic disagreement between peers. Let me skip this. And there's also this other question that we aim to address at some point, which is how should non-experts rational assess the disagreement about earth cooling research, in particular the disagreement between experts. And there's this paper that assesses this how do we react to expert disagreement in general by Delsen and Linevo, and we aim at applying this to this debate. But this is future work for now. So thank you very much. This is all. So we have some time for comments and questions if there are any. Let me wait. Let us wait if there are any comments or questions. Just feel free to speak if someone has comment or question. Okay. If not, what do you think? There seems to be no comment, no question. Okay, so we thank the panel. Thank you very much for having us here, and to thank you very much for let us comment you about our project. Thank you, the University of Tübingen. Does anyone want to say something else? No? So thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.